Hello, my name is Anika Bukapatnam, and my pronouns are she, her.
And my name is Maria Merova, and my pronouns are also she, her.
So let's get started with our fourth episode of 15 Questions with the Feminist. What is your name and what is your role in the menstrual movement?
My name is Michela Bedard, she, her, hers, and I am executive director at Period.
When did you first get involved in the menstrual activism space?
I have been at Period since very early 2020, but I have been involved in various ways working to eradicate period poverty for years. I've worked in other nonprofits and the political space advocating for women, and in many of the other nonprofits I've been a part of, period products have always been a deep need that we've never had enough of. In fact, I have worked for organizations that has relied on Period in the past for products. So I've always known about this crisis. I've always had them in my car when I go to various workplaces. So long before being involved in Period, I have known about and supported the movement and been an activist.
And what's the biggest challenge you have faced in the space so far?
People thinking that this is a fringe issue, that this is kind of a niche issue, when really wherever there's poverty, there's period poverty. And period poverty exists at the intersection of gender justice and economic justice. And having people understand that period poverty is a symptom of historical systemic racism, patriarchy, and all of the things that lead to poverty is the biggest barrier to change.
And what do you think is the biggest inertia that menstrual justice itself is facing?
There are so many ways to fight injustices in our country and in our world. And there are so many ways to view the fight for injustices through racial lens, youth leadership lens, economic inequality. And I think sometimes menstrual justice is put in a certain category, like of a gender fight or of a repro justice fight, when really they are all intersectional and we are all part of the same fight for equity. And I think that sometimes people working in social justice movements become expert in their own corner of the movement. And we have to realize that we are all allies. And because we are intersectional, we need to work together more.
So now shifting gear and talking more about Period as a corporation specifically. So for anyone who may not know, what is Period and what is their main mission?
Period is a global nonprofit headquartered here in beautiful Portland, Oregon. We are primarily a chapter organization. We have over 386, I think, chapters that exist in 47 states and over 25 countries of primarily youth-led volunteers working to eradicate period poverty in their communities. In addition to our chapter program, we work to eradicate period poverty through systemic education, policy work, and direct service. And that means that we know that period poverty can't be eradicated with only one of those three pillars. You can't do it with just direct service, you can't do it with only education, and you can't do it with only policy. Only bringing all three of these things together can we end it in our lifetime. So we distribute millions of pieces of product annually. We create educational curriculum for people of all ages in an open source way. And we work to draft, pass, and implement menstrual equity policy around the world.
Could you evaluate the efficacy of the chapter model that Period has sustained?
The chapter model is the lifeblood of our organization because it is all volunteers doing this work where they live on the ground. Everyone is an expert in their own community, and so they need to be the leaders of the work in their community. So we always say that we're a global organization, but we're really only 9 employees and we're thousands of volunteers. So it's really important to us that the people living the problem lead the solution, right? And that chapter model is indicative of those values. So if it's students leading it in their school, if it's a community group leading it in their community, if it's a social service organization that also chooses to be in the period chapter to solve it with the people that they are serving there, they need to remain the leaders in their communities. And so the chapter model is vital to the solution to this problem.
How can efforts to achieve period equity encourage leaders to be empowered and independent, so not reliant on organizations for every cycle that they have in the future?
Well, first of all, I would say that I think it's a little bit of a myth that people are reliant on organizations for every cycle. Unfortunately, the need far outstrips what organizations can do. We have a wait list of like 600 organizations on any given day of people who are desperate for product. So I wish it was the case that people could rely on organizations for all of their cycles. But the answer is what I touched on before, which is systemic policy change. Policy tends to follow culture. And we have seen in the last 7-10 years a major cultural shift of people finally talking about menstruation, organizations like Period finally getting some attention and becoming part of the conversation in these gender justice spaces. So now we're seeing policy follow it. We're seeing more and more states work to repeal the tampon tax to make it more affordable. We're seeing more and more states and school districts mandate products in schools, which will have an enormous effect on solving period poverty in those communities. And so the only way to truly solve it is to have the law and policy angle catch up. And paired with that has to be proper education. One of the main reasons that period poverty exists is a profound miseducation and undereducation about people's bodies who menstruate. And so we need to break that cycle and make sure that young people are fully educated about how this is an essential biological process.
What part do corporations need to play in social justice, specifically in this sphere?
It's really easy to alienate corporations in social justice work. Unfortunately, the fact of the matter is they hold a lot of power over our government and over our financial resources. Right now, there are no nonprofit period product companies. They're all made by manufacturers that are profiting off menstruation. So they have a huge role to play. They need to lower their prices and they need to donate more product.
Awesome. So describe the experience of being a leader in a space such as the menstrual equity space, which many people don't really acknowledge that it's important or support.
I have to wear hats like this, and I have to be really bold about my work because it's really easy to sideline the incredible work that I do and the work that we do. I don't want to at all say that I am the person doing this work. The thousands of volunteers are what fuel me and fuel this organization. I will say that I have to explain the work over and over and over again because the crisis is largely invisible. Social justice work that talks about the unhoused, right, or the ill, or even more and more about the inequality when it comes to healthcare costs, that's slightly more visible. We've gotten better at talking about that. We've gotten better at facing our major crises. Periods, because of historical stigma and taboo, but also because they happen to people often in their private lives, as not visible. So I'm drawing attention to the problem at the same time as trying to solve it. And I could only do that with a global network of inspired activists, and frankly, can only do that with the help of young people. I think Gen Z is going to solve this in their lifetime because they are one of the first generations that are not ashamed to talk about this and are willing to be brave and vulnerable at the same time, which is how you become a leader. And so it's a total joy to be able to solve this as a leader in this organization alongside thousands of young people. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. So, kind of branching off of your answer, how have the tactics of Period from advocacy to service evolved since its conception?
In an enormous way. Period was started by 2 high school students in 2014 that started doing product drives and handing them out to people who are in the unhoused community here in Oregon. Now we are a global advocacy organization. So I think we have rapidly realized that direct service solves the immediate need. It is essential to helping people live in dignity today. But in order to solve this problem long-term, we have to become an advocacy organization that gets deeply involved in policy and education. And that's the thorny, messy stuff that's not as sexy to look at. It's not as interesting to talk about. There's a lot of sausage making there, right? And so we are truly an advocacy organization now. I want to work us out of a job. I don't want to have to be in the work of distributing millions of pieces of product annually. I want to become an advocacy and education organization so that the law can take care of it. Nonprofits should exist because the public sector hasn't yet addressed the crisis. And so we need to make sure that the public sector catches up to the need.
And now we'll shift the focus to more generalized questions, including, as you stated, how can young people get involved?
It's easy for them to get involved. This movement was made for young people. They can join a Period chapter, go to period.org and find a chapter near them. They can start a chapter, but they don't have to be involved in a Period chapter to be involved in this movement. We are a large organization, but we are one of hundreds of menstrual equity organizations that do the real work every day. So I encourage people to find an organization in their community, but even if they don't have the capacity or the time to join an organization, think about periods when you're thinking about your community. If you're thinking about a shelter down the street, if you're thinking about a low-income housing organization, if you're thinking about a nonprofit that takes other donations, ask them if they need period products. When you're talking about essential supplies in schools and school funding, look into whether your local schools provide period products on site, specifically if they're a Title I or low-income school. So start thinking about periods when you're thinking about your community. It happens to over half of us, and it happens every month. And so we need to start thinking about it whenever we're thinking about how to best serve all members of our community. And those of you who are graduating and who are entering the workforce, ask your employer if there's period products on site. Schools is not the only place that people miss out on because of periods. So we just need to get a lot better at pointing this out. And by doing that, you are already part of the menstrual movement.
What is something that you wish you knew about menstruation when growing up?
I wish I had been able to talk to people about the experience of menstruation and how similar it is for so many of us. We all kind of go through this process every month of dealing with our period. And we learn about our bodies that way. And hopefully it gives us a sense of pride and ownership over our bodies. But I guess I wish at a young age that I had been able to sit more openly with my friends and family and talk about the literal physical discomfort, the nuts and bolts of it. How long does it last? What's it like for you? What does it feel like? I wish I had those really physical conversations at an early age, because it would have destigmatized my own body at a young age, and it would have opened up the conversation so much sooner.
And to that extent, what does the word stigma mean to you?
Stigma to me means fear. It's something that we don't understand, and so we stigmatize it to keep it away from us. We do this with race, we do this with income, we do this with education, but when we do it with bodies, it's especially dangerous. I think there is a direct through line from period stigma to the repeal of Roe v. Wade here in the United States. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of how bodies work. And so when we don't understand them, we're afraid of them, and then we stigmatize them so we don't have to talk about them. And it's really dangerous because it keeps people from having autonomy over their own periods, over their own reproductive health, and it keeps them at a distance from their own selves, because I think we can also stigmatize our own bodies. Super dangerous.
That I agree. To end on a lighter note, as we reach question number 14, do you have any particularly entertaining life stories pertaining to periods?
I mean, I personally do, yes, but I have to say that just working at Period every day is so entertaining. I work with the best people in the whole world, and I love that we're able to laugh about this. We're able to find joy in this, because this is really hard work and it's really vulnerable work. And I mean, like, the puns just keep coming. I was on a call this morning with a funder, and we were talking about like mission bleeding into another mission, and like everyone just cracked up. You have to be able to have fun in this work because it's hard. And I love doing this work every day. I am addicted to it. I love the people that care about this, that understand the depths of this crisis. And as hard as it is, it brings me total joy to be in this community.
That's great to hear. And as we close out, what are your words of wisdom to our viewers?
I have so many. I'm trying to think of what it can be kind of brief, and
you don't need to be brief.
I don't have to be brief.
No.
You know, I hope that everyone listening can ask themselves the same questions that I was just asked, because we are all feminists. Hopefully every day everyone is a feminist. We don't even need the term feminist by the end of our lives. And I hope that everyone can ask themselves the question of, what do they really care about? What brings them joy in the movements they're a part of? How can they further dig into the movements that they're a part of? And then trust themselves. This sounds like a boring piece of advice, but I really do mean it. Trust yourself. If you have something in your gut that brings you joy when you're a part of it, if you walk out of a conversation with like that spark and that energy inside you, that is your body telling you that you belong in this movement and you should dig in and do more work. Because you will find people to surround yourself with that have that fellow addiction, and then you will make true systemic change for people behind you. It is the greatest joy of my life to equip and train young people to solve this crisis themselves. And I hope that everyone listening can someday be in a position that I'm in, which is to joyfully surround yourself in an intergenerational movement where you can meet other like-minded people that can solve this in their lifetime. Listen to yourself.
Thank you. Is there anything else that you would like to discuss with us that you feel we haven't touched base on?
I think the only big question I would say is like, how do you talk about this movement with people in your life? So you asked a really good question of like, how can people get involved in the movement, right? And my answer was just talk about periods in your community. But I'd also say talk to people younger than you and older than you about this community. Don't only talk to people that is your age range, because there's younger people who might be new menstruators or who don't menstruate but don't know about it yet. And then people older than you, what has been their experience as a menstruator or a past menstruator? What are their thoughts about this? What's their reflection on menstrual equity? How did they survive menstrual inequity if they experienced it when maybe they didn't even have words for it? I think those reflections are really helpful and they inform the work that we do. What can we learn from the people before us? That's something that's very important to me, and I hope that everyone remembers that.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure having you, and thank you so much for talking with us.